Good day. Let me begin with a story. A few years ago, a mother brought her 10-year-old son to see me. She sat down and said something that I hear very often. Doctor, I think my son is not intelligent. The boy was sitting beside her, quietly looking at the floor. His teachers said he was slow. He could not keep up with reading. He struggled with tests. The school suggested that he might not be capable of academic work. So I spent some time with him. And within a few minutes, something interesting happened. The boy began asking questions, not simple questions, deep questions, curious questions, questions about how things work, about people, about why things happen. At one point, I had to stop and say, wait, who's the psychologist here? The boy was not lacking intelligence. What he was lacking was a system that understood how his brain learns. And that, I believe, is the quiet crisis of education. Today, we hear many conversations about declining quality of education in the Philippines. We see worrying indicators in reading, mathematics, and comprehension. We see international comparisons that make us uncomfortable. And the conversation often goes like this. Maybe students are not trying hard enough. Maybe teachers need to push more. Maybe we need more textbooks. Maybe we need more tests. Maybe we need more classrooms. But rarely do we ask the most basic question. Does our education system truly understand the brain that is supposed to learn? Because learning does not happen in textbooks. Learning happens in the brain. Most education systems were designed long before we understood much about neuroscience. So the structure of education became centered on content, lessons, modules, memorization, examinations. The assumption is simple. If information is delivered clearly enough, students will learn. But the brain does not learn simply by receiving information. The brain learns through process, attention, emotion, curiosity, meaning, repetition. Without these processes, information simply visits the brain and then quietly leaves. Sometimes it stays long enough to pass an exam, but rarely long enough to stay for life. Now, let us talk about something that every Filipino student knows very well: exams. In many schools, the calendar of a child is organized around tests: weekly tests, unit tests, quarterly exams, final exams. Sometimes, students feel like their entire childhood is one long preparation for the next tests. Now, assessment is important. We need ways to measure learning. But when assessment becomes the center of education, something dangerous happens. The brain shifts from learning mode to survival mode. A child studies not to understand, but to survive the exam, to memorize just enough to pass. And the moment the exam ends, the brain does something remarkable. It deletes the file. If you doubt this, ask any student what they learned 3 days after a major exam. Very often, the answer is silence, because the brain was never asked to build knowledge. It was asked to pass a test. Excessive testing also drains something precious from children: energy, curiosity, joy in learning. Many children begin school full of questions. Why is the sky blue? How do airplanes fly? Why do people dream? But after years inside a system dominated by exams, something changes. The child who once asked many questions begin asking only one. Will this be in the tests? And that is a tragic transformation because curiosity is the brain's most powerful learning engine. When curiosity disappears, learning becomes mechanical. Now, let me say something slightly rebellious. The problem is often not the children. The problem is that the system is not designed with the brain in mind. Every child sitting in a classroom has a different brain, different pace of development, different emotional states, different attention capacities. Some children need movement before they can focus. Some need emotional safety before they can think clearly. Some need curiosity before memory activates. Yet the system often says, sit down, be quiet, memorize this, and please do not move. If the brain could speak during class, it might say, I am trying, but this is not how I work. Now, here's another uncomfortable truth. Many educators were never deeply trained in the science of learning itself. Teachers are trained in subjects, math, language, history, science. But how many teachers receive serious training in how attention works in the brain, how memory forms, how stress shuts down learning, how emotional safety supports thinking? We train teachers to deliver content, but rarely to work with the biology of learning. That is like asking a mechanic to repair a car without explaining how the engine works. Let me be very clear. Teachers in the Philippines are among the most dedicated professionals you will ever meet. They work with large classes, limited resources, and enormous expectations. So, this is not a criticism of teachers. It is a reality check about the design of a system. When a system ignores the brain, even the most committed educators are forced to fight an uphill battle. Parents feel this tension as well. Many parents worry when their child struggles in school. My child cannot focus. My child does not like studying. My child is behind. But sometimes the child is not behind. Sometimes the child's brain simply does not fit the narrow path that the system recognizes. Some children are explorers, some are builders, some are storytellers, some are deep thinkers. But when education rewards only one kind of intelligence, many brilliant minds quietly disappear in the back row of the classroom. So, what is the way forward? Education must become brain aware. We must move from content centered education to process centered learning. Instead of asking only, what should students memorize? We must also ask, what does the brain need in order to learn well? Curiosity, meaning, engagement, psychological safety. When these conditions are present, the brain opens. When they are absent, the brain shuts down, no matter how good the lesson is. Because every classroom in the Philippines eventually meets one place, the brain of a child. If the system respects the brain, learning flourishes. If the system ignores the brain, children struggle, and we blame them for it. So perhaps the future of education begins with a very simple realization. Before we redesign curriculum, before we create more exams, before we push children harder, we must first understand the most important classroom in the country, the human brain. Because education without understanding the brain is like trying to grow a forest without understanding the soil. And our children deserve better soil. Thank you.